Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. Today's broadcast was recorded at the most recent MetaStrategy Digital Symposium. My guest is Mike McNamara. Mike is the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer of Target, the nearly $100 billion revenue retailer. Mike drives Target's technology roadmap, and he oversees business intelligence strategy and enterprise data analytics for the company. Prior to joining Target in 2015, Mike spent more than 17 years at the UK-based retailer Tesco, most recently as Chief Information Officer. He also serves on the board of directors of Hawaiian Airlines. In this interview, Mike discusses his beginnings at Target and what drew him to the Twin Cities-based retailer. We talk about the digital transformation that he and his team have driven, the sanctity of data and forming a data strategy, and the cultural change required to get the IT department to the point of being a driver of customer experience. Mike shares how he leads his team in what he calls ruthless prioritization and the ways in which Target acts as a talent factory, developing the next generation of chief information officers, among a variety of other topics. Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, I'm delighted to be here, Peter.
Well, taking a quick look back, I first knew of you for a distinguished tenure you had at Tesco, the grocery retailer based in the UK. And when you joined Target in 2015, the consequences of the cybersecurity breach of 2013 were still being felt and reconciled. You were going from the UK to the US, which was the home of Amazon, which was eating the lunch of a number of former stalwarts in the retail space as well. There were all sorts of, quite frankly, sort of uncertainty as to the position that Target occupied and its potential. Clearly, you saw a lot of potential. Take us back to those early days in terms of what you saw, why this was, in fact, appealing enough for you to, as you once told me, move to a state that you weren't exactly sure where it was in Minnesota.
That's absolutely right. Well, I had to look up Minneapolis on a map,
right.
and then research it online. Well, look, when I began to engage with Target, what was clear is that, this is a business that had lost some confidence. That was for sure, right? You mentioned the data breach, but there also was an unsuccessful entry into the Canadian market, which is pretty big. And the business actually had been losing market share for a number of years. So the downside when you looked at it was that there was a business that lacked confidence, right, in itself. But the upside was that you had this phenomenal brand. You had a business that was really, really brilliantly run financially. So it had a balance sheet to just die for. So, and then they had a tremendous body of really, really very, very highly capable people. Again, just slightly lost their way, but nevertheless, I mean, they were just smart folks, right? And you could see all that. So you knew that if this business could just find it the right direction, that it had both the financial resources and the people resources to be able to back any strategy that it chose to back. So it was very attractive. I mean, the possibilities, back then were just phenomenal. And the prospects, I thought, for the business, if we just get it right, strategically right, then we were onto a real winner.
And you've led a really extraordinary digital transformation at Target. As you contemplated, again, thinking back to the early stages, competing more squarely with some of the digital native organizations, some I've named, others that I've not, who had, of course, natural kind of technology advantages from more recently having the tabula rasa, the blank slate available to them than Target had. How did you think about prioritizing in order to more squarely compete in that space?
Well, listen, I think, it didn't take a genius even back in 2015 to work out that technology was going to be vital to Target's future. What always was going to mark out the winners and losers in retail were the ones the winners were always going to be the ones that invested in their technology and in their supply chain because of just the ongoing consumer trend towards digital. So that wasn't exactly a stellar insight. But the reality is, even though a lot of people realize that, a lot of companies underinvested, right, in digital. And Target actually had underinvested in digital historically. So it was pretty obvious that technology was going to be really, really key to Target's success in the future. So given that realization, again, not exactly a mind-blowing one, then you kind of say, well, technology is really important and I'm not going to outsource it. when I began at Target, 70% of the team was outsourced. Today, that's 7%, right? So we've gone from 70 to 7. Because I really believe that actually what was really, really important to Target was to make sure that we were focused on the right things, for sure, right? That we were only doing work that was of value strategically to the organization. Secondly, that we should build up our own engineering capability in-house, and a real focus on the team. And then thirdly, architecture. And architecture is key to it all. The reality is nobody can predict the future. I couldn't predict what was going to happen over the ensuing 6 years when I joined, and clearly a lot of things did happen, including the pandemic, which nobody saw coming. So what was really, really important was to start building out an architecture that would be scalable, stable, secure, but agile, right, and give you some speed. And that's been my focus really for the last 3 years. Getting people focused on the really the big strategic initiatives for Target, building up the engineering capability within the team, and then focusing in on creating just a great platform for the future.
Great insights all. Maybe we talk a little bit about the sanctity of data, the ensuring that you understand your operation effectively, your customers and their wants and desires and their dislikes for that matter. And the transformation, 6 years is a long time in the migration and advancements that have been made in data and analytics. How have you thought about its evolution in forming your own data strategy across that period?
Well, listen, I think, we've built up a very significant and very strong capability in data science and in AI. I mean, I've got about 400 engineers dedicated to just data engineering, and about 200 mathematicians, right? So, we use AIs extensively across Target, from everything from the things you would recognize as a guest. Clearly, you'd see them, all those recommender bars, etc., in the carousels that come up on your web experience. Fairly obvious. We use it in digital marketing. And then, of course, we use it right across our operation. So we use our data and we use AI extensively. I mean, very, very extensively. To tackle some of those big, old, hairy problems of retail, like demand forecasting and ordering and all along the supply chain, workload planning, assortment planning, pricing, promote which products we're going to promote, and and then we use it for lots of little things as well, right? Just looking at the quality of imagery that we put on the website, or to correct errors in item setup or whatever. So it's extremely extensively used right across Target, and it's been key to the success of the business, to be honest. And I think it's still. There's just so much more to be done there. It's a really, really exciting, I think, avenue of discovery in the future, and a great source of competitive advantage for the business.
I want to go back to this extraordinary statistic you offered of formerly 70% outsourced, now 7%, adding tremendous weight to the engineering talent within the organization. So a capability to build rather than simply buy and integrate exclusively, or at least primarily, let's say, as was the past for yours, like so many organizations. And now then developing an ability to deliver incredible guest experiences. And that strikes me, the organization that would choose to, as so many did, to outsource 70% of IT in some ways says, it's other parts of the organization that are going to impact the customer before IT does. And now with the changes you've made, IT is much more positioned to not think of colleagues as customers, but to think of the people who provide the revenue for your company as customers and impact that to a much greater degree.
Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
No, I was just going to say, as you contemplate that migration, that's a significant cultural change that you have fostered, and would love some insights as to how that was brought about as well.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think clearly all the technology, I think, has experienced this, and a couple of the speakers before me were speaking about it. I mean, if I go back long enough in my career, technology was all about operational efficiency and operational effectiveness. I spent most of my retail life in warehouses and in the supply chain and in stores and so on and so forth. And my probably key business partner was a chief operating officer. And today that's just completely different. Today, technology is about making money, right? It's about selling stuff, far more than it is about moving stuff, which it was in the past in retail. So it has been it's completely changed over the course of my career. But that engineering capability was really, really important, right, to build that up. And not just the capability, but the way we worked and the composition of the team. And in terms of the way we worked, whatever it was, 6 years ago now, we moved into a product DevOps model. And we did it in an all-in kind of, damn the bullets kind of way. We just decided that this is what we're going to do. And we moved the entire team into a product structure overnight. And then we burned our bridges behind us by releasing all the project managers, program managers, and business analysts. And then we got on with making it work, which might sound a wee bit cavalier. It wasn't so cavalier. I mean, we backed it up with just a ton of training. And that really was huge, right? And that's made it such a difference. So today we have, a couple of hundred products across the business, and each of those products do a release either daily or weekly. So that, and they could do it more frequently. The reality is the rate limiter is how quickly our business and our guests kind of absorb change rather than how quickly we can produce it. That speed and agility has just been a phenomenal benefit to the business. So I'll give you an example. Like last year, clearly when COVID hit, I mean, our business skyrocketed. It just went, it went through the roof. Our digital business grew like 3 years and 3 weeks, which was pretty extraordinary. And things like services like curbside and drive up, I mean, they grew in the thousands of percents. I mean, as people were, staying at home and ordering from home. So the systems just didn't, it was fairly easy for us to scale up to that. We took out our kind of Cyber Monday playbook and then just played it all year. But we already had the ability to scale our systems to that kind of capacity. So that was relatively straightforward. But we also had to produce new applications and new features and functions, both for our guests and our business at a phenomenal rate. You might remember, a lot of jurisdictions restricted the number of guests or total number of people you could have in a store at any given time. So, you might have gone to a number of our competitors and they would have had somebody at the door with a clicker and a clipboard, right? Counting the number of people in and out. But we developed an app that was linked to an AI over the top of the door, in a camera above the doorway, which then just sent an event back down to a handheld from the team members. So we could keep a constant tally of the number of guests in our stores. That app took a week to produce and 2 weeks to roll out nationally. And that's the speed. And there was lots of other examples. I mean, say Drive Up went through the roof in terms of a service. Last year we planned to roll grocery Drive Up for grocery fresh items in particular out to 2 markets. I think it was going to be Minneapolis and Dallas. We rolled out to the whole country, right? Because the demand was there. And actually the hardest thing about rolling Drive Up out to the entire country, it wasn't the technology, it was getting permission to paint those Drive Up lanes inside the car parks and putting up posts, right? So it was the physical stuff that turned out to be the most difficult. From a tech point of view, we could just produce the applications really quickly. That's why, having that engineering team in-house without the handoffs, having a product structure that manages a backlog, and then having an agile architecture, that's why it really, really mattered. And there's no way Target would have had the standout year we had last year had we not invested in the capability in the team and the definition of the architecture.
Remarkable story, and shows to the prescience, not that you would have been prescient enough to predict a pandemic, but the prescience to recognize that resilience and nimbleness was something that would need to be the calling card of an organization like yours, and thus parlaying the advantages of making those investments early on in your tenure. If you talk to, as I do, people who know you well, and I've got to know you a bit myself as well, that people will talk about how you're a visionary, how you're an advocate for the teams that you lead, and that you're an advocate for technology more generally speaking, especially with colleagues who maybe are less savvy, and so sort of explaining to them the ins and outs of that. Another thing that comes up I have found is that you are a ruthless prioritizer, and I think it's such an interesting way of a good reputation to have, and I think partially describes the necessity to not do everything for everyone, but rather to have a good mechanism to determine where the greatest value is going to be derived. And so I wonder, maybe take a quick moment and
Okay.
I'd love your reaction to that as a reputation point.
Well, look, I mean, I think it's broadly true. So I'll give you that.
It's fair enough.
And I certainly have the reputation within our business of it. I mean, and it's actually a lesson I learned from a startup that we bought when I was back in my Tesco days, and because the startup, focused on, that's where the term came from, ruthless prioritization. Because literally they needed to make sure they had enough cash to pay the payroll at the end of the month. So you could not be in any way frivolous with your money, and you had to put your money and your resource for where it was going to create the best near-term returns, right? Purely out of necessity. But I find it extraordinarily useful, right? Just to get people focused on fewer, bigger things rather than just a plethora of little things. So again, when I joined Target, we were doing something, it was close to 900, it was 880 projects on the box, and this is, and there's no way a company has 880 priorities, not even a Target. We don't have 880 priorities. So, we began to slim that down fairly quickly. And the way I did it is I got all the leadership team in a room in front of a whiteboard. I gave them 5 Post-it notes each and said, write down your top 5 tech priorities. And then we did an exercise of prioritizing what they put in the Post-it notes. Of course, the good thing about giving them 5 Post-it notes each is that limited the number of priorities to 50, right? So because there were 10 of them. And really then we shaped the organization around those priorities back then. And the organization has remained broadly consistent, right? There's some areas we've clearly invested more in. Marketing and digital would be 2 obvious areas, but in other areas it's remained the level of investment has remained fairly static. And look, I know it's a really simple way of stopping all the squabbling about this thing is more important than that thing. Because there's one thing in my life, in my retail career, I know that I will never get a marketeer and a merchant to agree, right? So, so really, it was a divide and conquer strategy. So we had this number of engineers on marketing, that number of engineers on merchandising, and they had to prioritize them within their own buckets.
Yeah.
And that got prioritization on their own. And now it's actually, I know a lot of colleagues in the industry still talk a lot about business technology alignment. The reality is, in the way we work today at Target, there is no chance of misalignment, right? Because you just don't have those squabbles anymore. Yeah. Things are prioritized within pyramids.
Yeah, very interesting.
And look, and I've kept the resources constrained, right? I always keep the resources just slightly behind the demand, just to keep people a little bit hungry and keep them keen and make them prioritize a little bit harder.
When I think about the people who are the CIOs who've had an outsized influence on not just their company, but their industry and beyond, many of them are the ones who have had remarkable family trees, if you will. People who once reported to them who've gone on to become leaders at other companies. Your family tree is extensive at this point. It includes Sanctity, the global CIO at Lowe's, Brett Brunick, the chief digital and technology officer at Thrivent, Pavan Verma, the global CIO at MetLife, just to name 3 examples. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit the extent to which Target now has become this remarkable talent factory. It's one of those organizations that if you have spent time in the digital and technology part of the organization, I'm sure other parts as well, but we'll speak to the one that's relevant here, that's an extraordinary badge of honor that will serve you well should you choose to go elsewhere also. Reflect on that if you would.
Well, listen, it is the thing that I'm probably most proud of, or one of the things that I'm most proud of as I wind up my career, is that many people who have worked for me, many more beyond the 3 you mentioned, are CIOs of large corporations around the world, or at least are senior executives in large corporations around the world. But I've always seen that as a particularly, and it is a strength of Target. I think we have become an academy organization. We produce talent, and the reality is that you don't have places for all that talent to go. I mean, there's only one CIO. I've got far more than one person in my team who's capable of being CIO. So they will go elsewhere, and then I'm sad to see them go, clearly, but I'm delighted that they're gone on to lead other big organizations. And I think that's not just true at my level at CIO. I mean, that's true throughout our organization. We produce fantastic architects, fantastic engineers, and I can't satisfy all of their ambitions. But I'm good with that because we set up a model around bringing people in and developing the heck out of them and giving them the scope to learn. We run a thing called 50 Days of Learning. I expect my engineers to spend 20% of their time on learning and development, and we're pretty good at adhering to that. So it has become an academy organization, and I'm actually very, very proud of that.
As well, you should be. Well, what's next for you? What are you contemplating after you leave your post? What are you looking forward to doing?
Playing golf. Visiting every wine growing district in the world. I'm spending this and reading the 1,000 best books ever written. That is seriously what I'm going to do, Peter. My career aspiration was to retire. I've now actually hit my career aspiration, or will do fairly shortly, as soon as we announce my successor.
Well, Mike, congratulations on what everyone can agree has been an extraordinary tenure at Target and beyond across your tenure in multiple companies in the retail space. It's been wonderful to have a bit of a bird's eye view into some of the accomplishments and that you and your team have put in place. And thank you so much for joining us today and telling us a bit about them as well. I know that I've gained mightily from this. I hope everyone here has as well.
Thanks, Peter.